Today I want to share a story about a time I realized just how vulnerable we are, even in the places we feel safest. This happened about 5 years ago, when I was living in a small isolated cabin deep in the woods of upstate Maine. It wasn't a rustic cabin. It was a modern, well-insulated place, but it was definitely remote. The nearest neighbor was over a mile away, and the nearest town was a good 30-minute drive. I loved the solitude, the quiet, the feeling of being completely disconnected from the noise of the world. I worked remotely, so this setup was perfect for me. The only downside, which I quickly learned to ignore, was the lack of reliable cell service. If something went wrong, I was on my own. The cabin was built on a slight incline, and underneath the main structure, there was a crawl space. It wasn't a full basement, just enough space for the foundation, plumbing, and HVAC unit. It was sealed off by a heavy wooden access door on the exterior of the house, near the back deck. I rarely ever went near it, maybe once a year to check the pipes before winter. It was just a dark, dusty, spider-infested hole, and I preferred to keep it that way. The weirdness started subtly, almost imperceptibly. About 6 months into my stay, I started noticing small things missing. Not valuable things, just oddities. A specific brand of canned soup from the pantry, a cheap plastic rain poncho that I kept in the mudroom closet, a roll of duct tape. I initially chalked it up to my own forgetfulness. Living alone, you sometimes misplace things and assume they vanished. But then the sounds began. It was always late at night, usually between 2 and 4 a.m. A faint, rhythmic scraping sound. It sounded like something dragging across concrete, or maybe wood, but muffled. I would wake up instantly, heart pounding, and listen intently. The sound would always stop as soon as I was fully awake. I tried to rationalize it. It must be the house settling, or maybe an animal outside, a raccoon trying to get into the trash cans. But the sound was too consistent, too deliberate. One night, the scraping was louder than usual. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself to go back to sleep, anxious. Then I heard a distinct thump, followed by a soft, almost imperceptible clink. It sounded like something metallic had been dropped. This time I couldn't dismiss it. I grabbed the heavy flashlight I kept next to my bed, and slowly crept out of the room. The house was silent now, the kind of heavy, oppressive silence that follows a loud noise in the dark. I stood in the kitchen, listening. Nothing. I checked the doors and windows, all locked. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but the image of the missing items and the scraping sounds kept me rooted to the spot. I decided to check the crawlspace access door outside. It was a stupid idea, I know, but the thought that an animal might be trapped under the house, or worse, that someone was trying to get in, was unbearable. I slipped on a jacket and boots, unlocked the back door, and stepped out onto the deck. The air was freezing, and the moon was hidden behind thick clouds. I shone the flashlight beam toward the ground, searching for the wooden door. As the beam hit the access panel, I froze. The heavy wooden door was slightly ajar, not wide open, but definitely pulled away from the frame, maybe an inch or two, enough to see the absolute blackness underneath. My blood ran cold. I knew I had secured that door months ago. It was heavy, and it required a deliberate effort to open. This wasn't the wind. This wasn't an animal. I stood there, flashlight shaking in my hand, trying to process what I was seeing. If someone was under there, they were still there. The door was only slightly open, meaning they hadn't left yet. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. "Hello," I called out, my voice barely a whisper in the vast silence of the woods. Nothing. Just the sound of my own ragged breathing. I took a hesitant step closer, shining the light directly into the gap. I couldn't see anything but dirt and shadows. I was about to slam the door shut and run back inside when I noticed something on the ground right next to the opening. It was a small, empty can of the exact brand of soup that had gone missing from my pantry weeks ago. That confirmed it. Someone had been living, or at least hiding, under my house, and they were using my supplies. I backed away slowly, keeping the flashlight trained on the gap. I fumbled for my phone, remembering the terrible cell service. I had to get inside, lock the doors, and try to call the police from the one spot in the living room where I sometimes got a single bar. As I turned to run back toward the deck steps, I heard it, a low, wet cough. It came from directly beneath my feet, muffled by the floorboards, but undeniably human. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I just ran. I burst through the back door, slammed it shut, and through the deadbolt. I locked every other door and window in the house, my hands shaking so violently I could barely turn the keys. I scrambled to the living room, holding my breath, listening for any sound of movement outside. I pressed my phone against the window, desperately searching for a signal. 1 bar, 2 bars. I immediately dialed 911. The dispatcher sounded miles away, the connection crackling and fading. I tried to explain, "There's someone under my house, in the crawl space. They're still there." The dispatcher kept asking me to repeat the address, the signal dropping in and out. It felt like an eternity. While I was struggling with the call, I heard a new sound. It wasn't the scraping or the cough. It was a slow, deliberate thump, 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 coming from the floor directly beneath the living room. It sounded like someone was hitting the underside of the floorboards with a heavy, blunt object. The sound was moving. It was traveling from the center of the house toward the front, where the main entrance was. I dropped the phone. The call still connected but useless, and backed away from the window. The thumping stopped right beneath the front door. Then silence. I stood there, paralyzed, waiting for the sound of the door being splintered open. But instead, I heard something far worse. A sound of wood groaning, followed by a soft, almost whispering voice. It was coming from the floor vent right next to the fireplace. The voice was low, raspy, and completely unintelligible, like someone trying to speak through a mouthful of dust. I realized the HVAC unit was in the crawl space. They were using the ventilation system to communicate, or maybe just to breathe. I grabbed the nearest heavy object, a cast iron skillet from the kitchen, and backed into the hallway, away from the living room. The whispering stopped. Then the thumping started again, but this time it was faster, more frantic. It was moving back toward the center of the house, then toward the back. I heard a loud, splintering crack from the back of the house, near the crawl space door. They were trying to force their way out, or maybe back in, through the exterior door. I heard the dispatcher's voice faintly calling my name from the dropped phone in the living room. I had to get help. I ran back to the phone, snatched it up, and screamed into the receiver. "They're breaking out. Send someone now." I didn't wait for a response. I ran to my bedroom, locked the door, and barricaded it with the heavy dresser. I stood there, skillet raised, listening to the chaos outside. The splintering stopped. The house went silent again. After what felt like hours, I heard the distant sound of sirens. They were still far away, but they were coming. When the police finally arrived, they found the crawlspace door completely ripped off its hinges, lying in the dirt. There were clear drag marks leading away from the house and into the dense woods. They searched the crawlspace. It was small, cramped, and filled with cobwebs, but they found evidence that someone had been living there for a long time. There was a makeshift bed made of old insulation and plastic sheeting, several empty cans of my missing soup, and a collection of small, strange items: a rusty pair of scissors, a child's lost marble, and the missing roll of duct tape. The most disturbing discovery, however, was found near the HVAC unit. Taped to the main air duct, right next to where the whispering had come from, was a small handwritten note. It was addressed to me. It simply read, "I know your schedule. I know your breathing. I know your fear." The police never found the person. They suggested it was likely a transient, maybe someone mentally unstable, who had found a secluded spot to hide out. But the note, the deliberate way they had used the house's structure to terrorize me, the fact that they knew my routine, it all pointed to something much more calculated. I moved out of that cabin 2 weeks later. I couldn't stand the thought of that dark, dusty space beneath my feet, knowing someone had been listening to me sleep, watching me live, waiting for the right moment. Even now, living in a city apartment, I still check the locks 3 times before bed, and every time I hear a strange sound, I remember that low, wet cough coming from the darkness below. Some questions are better left unanswered, but some fears, once they crawl out of the shadows, never truly go away.